Welcome to this explainer where we're going to completely dismantle the myth of laziness once and for all. If you're a creative, a thinker, or an entrepreneur, look, you have absolutely battled with chronic procrastination. We've all been there, right? You set a goal, you map out all the steps, and then you just don't do it. You tell yourself to push harder, to use more willpower, to just be a more disciplined person. But today, we're going to uncover exactly why willpower continuously fails you and why that heavy resistance you're feeling, it isn't a moral failing at all. When people finally look at procrastination through a subconscious lens, they almost always land on this profound realization. Wait, maybe I'm not lazy after all. And for a lot of us, that thought brings just this immense wave of relief. But it also sets up a pretty fascinating mystery. If procrastination isn't laziness, well, why does the pattern keep happening even after we understand it intellectually? You can be completely 100% aware of your self-sabotage, actively wanting to build that business or finish that creative project, and still feel completely emotionally trapped. So why is that? Okay, let's dive into the real paradigm shift here. The absolute root of the issue is that procrastination is actually subconscious identity protection. See, your behavior is intimately tied to your identity, and your mind fundamentally prefers what feels familiar over what is objectively beneficial. Really, let that sink in for a second. Even if your current holding pattern is frustrating, deeply uncomfortable, and literally limiting your potential, your nervous system prioritizes safety over productive consistency. It clings to the familiar because, biologically speaking, familiarity equals psychological safety. Procrastinating is just acting as emotional protection. It's a failure of Actually, scratch that. It's not a failure at all. It's a learned protective response meant to keep you shielded from perceived emotional threats. The problem is, over time, this repeated procrastination morphs from just an action you take into a fixed identity. You unconsciously start seeing it as who you fundamentally are. It's an identity trap. Do you quietly identify as someone who never finishes things, or maybe someone with wasted potential? Or you tell yourself you're just someone who works better under pressure? Once a pattern gets deeply tied to your identity like that, trying to change it feels incredibly threatening to the brain. Moving forward isn't just checking a task off a to-do list anymore. It literally means becoming a completely different version of yourself. To your subconscious, identity change triggers massive uncertainty, which is why we really have to detach your true sense of self from these past unproductive habits. And this perfectly illustrates the internal conflict you're facing every single day. Your conscious mind, the ambitious artist or entrepreneur inside you, is looking around going, yes, opportunity, success, visibility, growth. But your nervous system, it isn't looking at logic. It responds exclusively to what those events mean internally. So while you consciously see success, your nervous system senses exposure. It senses the absolutely terrifying vulnerability of being visible. It sees public judgment. It feels the crushing burden of high expectations. Your brain is literally thinking, uh-oh, if I publish this, now I can fail publicly. Now I can't hide anymore. So the absolutely crucial point to remember is this. Growth changes your self-concept, and the subconscious mind very often interprets major identity shifts as massive, flashing warning sign of potential danger. This explains so much, doesn't it? It explains why we sometimes sabotage the exact creative opportunities we've consciously desired for years. Those stubborn creative blocks you hit, they're often just symptoms of hidden identity protection. It's not because you lacked the desire or the drive or the ambition, no way. It's simply because your nervous system was not prepared for the identity expansion connected to that success. The future version of you just felt way too emotionally exposed. So let's see how this actually plays out in our daily behaviors. I want you to ask yourself, are you stuck in endless preparation? Because this is one of the most common and honestly most insidious forms of identity-based procrastination. It looks like constantly learning but never ever implementing. It's endlessly tweaking and refining your ideas, consuming massive amounts of information instead of actually creating the thing, or waiting until you feel 100% ready to launch. At first glance, doing all that preparation feels wonderfully productive, right? You genuinely feel like you're putting in the work. But really, endless planning just creates the illusion of movement without forcing you to take any actual emotional risk. The preparation is acting as a shield, because as long as you are preparing, you are totally protected from visibility, from the judgment of your peers, from uncertainty, imperfection, and failure. And paradoxically, you are also shielded from success, which, as we just talked about, brings its own terrifying set of expectations. Your subconscious mind absolutely loves these emotionally safe little illusions because they keep you perfectly hidden. This whole dynamic reveals a really painful secret shared by so many highly intelligent, creative people. You might be secretly terrified of discovering the actual real-world limits of your potential. Think about it. As long as a dream remains untested, the possibility remains alive, infinite, and completely flawless in your head. But the exact moment you take action, you create a measurable reality. And a measurable reality can challenge your identity. For a lot of nervous systems, that vulnerability is simply overwhelming, because staying in the fantasy feels profoundly safer than confrontation. And when we eventually do have to confront this reality, we often fall straight into this brutal, repetitive progression, the shame cycle. You procrastinate, right? And then you immediately attack yourself internally. You ask, what's wrong with me? Why am I wasting my life? All that shame creates immense emotional heaviness and overwhelm. And what exactly does an exhausted, overwhelmed nervous system do? It seeks safety through avoidance, which, of course, absolutely guarantees more procrastination. Beating yourself up internally never, ever creates sustainable motivation. It just exhausts your nervous system further, making consistency literally impossible. Which brings us to the most important takeaway of this entire explainer, the climax of everything we're discussing today. Most people think that if they can just force themselves to be consistent, grind it out, they will eventually feel safe and confident. But psychologically speaking, the exact opposite is true. Safety creates consistency. When your nervous system feels safer, your focus naturally improves, the resistance drops, and taking action finally feels so much lighter. So, the big question is, how do we actually achieve this? How do we stop forcing and start feeling safe? Well, we are going to pivot right now into some actionable solutions. I'm going to walk you through 5 concrete shifts you can make today to build that internal safety, detach your sense of self from those past unproductive habits, and finally start moving forward. Shift number 1, stop defining yourself by the pattern. It's time to intentionally separate your true identity from your learned protective responses. Shift 2 is all about building trust through small, undeniable evidence. Your subconscious changes through evidence, not self-criticism. So try these 3 small daily actions. Taking one tiny step teaches your brain that movement is actually possible. Making a messy, terrible first draft proves that imperfection is perfectly safe. And surviving a minor mistake proves that discomfort is survivable, not dangerous. Taking these actions provides the exact emotional proof your subconscious needs to detach the act of creating from the feeling of danger. Moving on to shift 3, allow for slow identity expansion. You have to graduate your exposure to visibility and success over time, rather than rushing it. Shift number 4, separate your self-worth from your performance. Your absolute value as a person shouldn't be determined by your latest achievement. And finally, shift 5, work directly with the subconscious to resolve that underlying fear and emotional conditioning. I really want you to absorb this quote. You do not become consistent by hating the version of yourself that struggles. Sustainable transformation never, ever comes from emotional violence toward yourself or from some intense, white-knuckled discipline. Because procrastination is fundamentally physiological and emotional. You've got to use concrete exercises like guided introspection, mind-body work, or even hypnotherapy to soften those protective layers lingering beneath the surface. When you intentionally separate your personal worth from your performance, you drastically reduce the intense emotional pressure that loads up every single task. And when your nervous system finally stops associating your goals with danger and public judgment, your mind will naturally begin cooperating with the future you actually want to build. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take away from our explainer today. I want you to think about your biggest creative ambitions and the specific blocks you've been facing, and ask yourself honestly, are you trying to force yourself forward with willpower and shame, or are you finally ready to learn how to feel safe enough to move? The choice is entirely yours, but the path to real, lasting consistency always begins with safety. Thanks for learning with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.